I thought God gave us moral order.
There's no moral order as pure as this storm. There's no moral order at all. There's just this. Can my violence conquer yours?
Not violent.
Yes, you are. You're as violent as they come. I know this because I'm as violent as they come. The constraints of society were lifted, and I was all that stood between you and a meal. You would crack my skull with a rock and eat my meaty parts. Wouldn't you? Crowley thinks you're harmless, that you can be controlled, but I know different.
You don't know me.
Oh, but I
No,
do.
you don't know me.
I know you. We've known each other for centuries. If I was to sink my teeth into your eye right now, would you be able to stop me before I blinded you?
Give it a try.
That's the spirit.
Oh boy, man, this scene is so chilling. Just the line, do you think your violence beats my violence? Whew. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast where psychology meets film. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and in this Christmas time solo episode, we are discussing Shutter Island. I'm discussing Shutter Island. I've been using Shutter Island in my courses, primarily my intro course, for, I want to say off and on, for the last 7 or 8 years. The movie itself came out in 2010, so it's 15 years old. And I want to say it's one of Leonardo DiCaprio's best, most underrated performances in his recent filmography, we'll say. Yeah, he won the Oscar for like The Revenant and everything like that. But this was a tough film to act, and I think he did it phenomenally. There is so much to discuss in this movie, and it's been a long time coming to have this movie on the show, but it took me bringing it back because I rotate my films in intro. So last year in intro, I did What About Bob, which has been on the program before, and it's been a couple of years since I did Shutter Island, and I didn't really think about doing it on the show 2 years ago. But when I realized, you know what, I am going to show it in the beginning of December, and it's going to be fresh in my mind, I'll just do my end of year show where I typically don't have a guest. I mean, sometimes I've done Christmas episodes with a guest, sometimes I haven't. And so I thought, you know what, let's just do an end of the year bang. I'll just do a little bit of an audio essay on this movie, its psych content, why I use it in my intro class, and what it compares to with the psychopathology that I end up talking about in that class. Because I don't talk a lot about psychopathology in intro. I just sort of introduce the topic. We talk a little bit about therapy, but modern therapy as opposed to therapy set in the mid-1950s or whatever. So yeah, I wanted to explore this one, and I think I've got a good program for you all. I've highlighted a few things. I think 3 segments is what I'm planning on. We'll talk about Leo's character, Teddy, Andrew, his psychosis, his psychopathology. Then we'll talk about his experience through treatment and Dr. Cawley and the radical idea of role-playing therapy that pretty much is the majority of the plot of this film. And then a few tidbits here and there in that third segment. I think sort of the idea of the dissociation and what is happening in Teddy's / Andrew's mind as he's going through the extended role play psychotherapy, and then what that ultimately means for his character at the end of the movie, right? What you see Leo's character do at the end and his fate. So I think I've got a good program. I hope you stick around and listen to all of that. Before we jump into the psych of it all, let's go ahead and talk about the film itself, right? So like I said, the film came out in 2010. Main star is Leonardo DiCaprio, but what is bearing the lead a little bit is that this is a Martin Scorsese film. This is a psych thriller. I think Martin Scorsese doesn't get a lot of credit for his psychological thrillers. He does a really phenomenal job of psychological thrillers. And to set this movie on an island just adds to the drama, the mystery, the thrill, all of that. So it is a Martin Scorsese film, and I think out of his entire filmography, this ranks toward the top. I think it might be my second favorite Martin Scorsese film after The Departed, which, of course, is a remake of a Hong Kong thriller named Infernal Affairs. So I like the more original idea in Shutter Island. The writers of this film are Leda Kalogridis and Dennis Lehane. Like I said, it stars Leo DiCaprio. Next up, we got Ben Kingsley as Dr. Cawley, a new school psychoanalyst who attempts to break Andrew Laeddis, who is Leo DiCaprio's real name in this movie. You hear him go by Teddy Daniels the entire time. So he's like double credited, but in the cast billing, as to not ruin the surprise, he is only credited as Teddy Daniels. So that's I'm obviously spoiling it for you. It's been out for 15 years. If you haven't seen it, you really need to go see it. So that's Dr. Cawley. He's doing this big old LARP, if you will, live action role play. Mark Ruffalo plays Chuck Ollie. Again, has another name in this whole thing because he does another character. He plays Teddy Daniels' partner. That's the partner's name, but he is actually Dr. Sheehan. So he is a doctor at this setting, and I'll explain the setting here in just a second. In a lovely, lovely, lovely small role, but needed nevertheless, Max von Sydow plays Dr. Neidring, who is a German defector. Okay, so again, the film is set in the mid-1950s, so about a decade after World War II, a little bit less than a decade after World War II. We learn that Andrew Laeddis and Teddy have the shared history of being part of the military force that liberates Dachau, the concentration camp that is just northwest of Munich, I believe. So he was associated with that and obviously has that known history about what was happening at Dachau during the war, right? So there is some shroud of mystery around Dr. Neidring and his role at this facility, but it is said that he does psychosurgery and more often than not does orbital frontal lobotomies of the more extreme and violent patients / inmates at this facility. Michelle Williams plays Dolores, who we only see in flashbacks and delusional hallucination. Okay, so hallucinations, that is perceptions that aren't there, visual and auditory, but they are of a delusional nature as well, right? So there is a shared history between Teddy and Andrew, and we see some of the previous shared history, but then we find out the real reason in a flashback. So we only see Michelle Williams in these ethereal ways. Patricia Clarkson plays a version of Rachel Solando. We see her only in a cave scene, and she tells She tells Teddy about like MK Ultra stuff that's happening, right? People being given medication and they have no idea what this medication does, and all of the conspiracy around what is happening at the facility. Jackie Earle Haley has a bit role as George Noyce, a very scary role. I really love it. Ted Levine plays the warden. He was in the bumper clip, "Does your violence beat my violence?" Oh, he's barely in the film. Those are his only speaking lines when he's having this conversation with Teddy/Andrew. John Carroll Lynch plays Deputy Warden McPherson. No nonsense kind of guy. Elias Koteas has a small cameo as Ladis, a hallucination of sort of the deepest, darkest aspects of Teddy's mind. And then several other bit roles here and there, but those are the main speaking roles in this movie. And like I said, solid cast, solid film. It's got a higher than 8 rating on IMDb. Leo won the 2010 Teen Choice Award for Movie Actor. It won, the film won the best screenplay at the Scream Awards. I love it. But it wasn't really nominated for anything like big. Like it didn't get any Oscar nominations, which is a bummer. It did get a bunch of Saturn Award nominations, which is pretty cool. But otherwise, yeah, it didn't really get a ton of acclaim in that way, even though it is loved by watchers. It has a 63 Metascore. I mean, it's a great movie. It's a great movie. There's not a lot that you can say that is wrong with this movie, I'll say. And I'll leave you with one last bit of trivia, which I love, and I recently learned. So Shutter Island is the name of the island, okay? And on this island is a prison/mental institution, a psychiatric hospital called Ashcliffe, okay? So it is both a psychiatric hospital for what would have been considered the, quote, criminally insane individuals, which brings us to why Teddy is here in the first place. So, or more or less Andrew. We learn more or less Andrew is here and had been there for the past 2 years. But here's the bit of trivia. So like I said, the name of the island is Shutter Island, and you hear that in one of the opening lines. It's one of Deputy Warden McPherson's line. He says, "Gentlemen, welcome to Shutter Island." Right? They just get off the ferry from mainland New England, and they're on the island, ready to head up to Ashcliffe, right? So Ashcliffe is just one part of the island. There's a lighthouse, and the rest of it is just basically rocky coastline and bluffs. But the title, Shutter Island, the name of the island, is an anagram of truths and lies, or truths denials. And that's an aspect of the movie that is so good, because one of the things that we'll explore here is, and probably in one of the clips that I share in this episode, are going to come back to the idea of anagrams. Anagrams is a part of that. When you come up with these delusional fantasies, you use existing knowledge. It's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. So let's jump in to Shutter Island.
I've had enough of this bullshit. Where's my partner, huh? Where's Chuck? Where is he?
Let's try this another way. Your wife's maiden name was Chanal, am I correct?
Don't you even talk about her,
I'm afraid I have to. Notice anything these 4 names have in common? It's your rule of 4. Andrew, what do you see?
If you've done anything to my partner, Doctor, that is a violation of...
Focus, Andrew, what do you see? The names have the same letters. Edward Daniels has exactly the same 13 letters as Andrew Ladis. The same as Rachel Solando and Dolores Chanal. The names are anagrams for each other.
Your tactics, they're not going to work on
You
me.
came here for the truth. Here it is. Your name is Andrew Ladis. The 67th patient at Ashcliffe is you, Andrew.
Bullshit.
You were committed here by court order 24 months ago. Your crime is terrible. One you can't forgive yourself for, so you invented another self.
All right. Let's get down to the facts.
You've created a story in which you're not a murderer, you're a hero, still a U.S. Marshal, only here at Ashcliffe because of a case, and you've uncovered a conspiracy so that anything we tell you about who you are, what you've done, you can dismiss as lies, Andrew.
My name is Edward Daniels.
I've been hearing this fantasy for 2 years now. I know every detail. Patient 67, the storm, Rachel Solando, your missing partner, the dreams you have every night. You were at Dachau, but you may not have killed any guards. I wish I could let you just live in your fantasy world. I really do. But you're violent, trained, dangerous. You're the most dangerous patient we have. You've injured orderlies, guards, other patients. 2 weeks ago, you attacked George Noyce.
No, I'm fucking on to you, Doctor. You had Noyce beaten.
Of course I didn't.
Give me one reason why I would even touch him.
Because he called you ladies, and you do anything not to be him. I have a transcript of the conversation you had with Noyce yesterday. This is about you and ladies. That's all it's ever been about.
No, he's saying this is about me and ladies.
When you asked him what happened to his face, he said, and I'm quoting again, you did this.
No, he meant that it was my
You
fault.
almost killed him. The warden and the board of overseers are determined something be done. It's been decided that unless we can bring you back to sanity now, right now, permanent measures will be taken to ensure you can't hurt anyone ever again. They'll lobotomize you, Andrew. Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand. I understand just fine. If I don't play along with your little game here, Dr. Naring's gonna turn me into one of his ghosts. What about my partner? You gonna tell the U.S. Marshal's office that he's a defense mechanism?
Okay, so as I said, there's a big piece of psychopathology in this movie. It's why I use it in my intro psych class. I do offer it because it is rated R. I do offer an alternative watch for anyone who doesn't want to explore this kind of film. And I don't show it every year, so I have a nice rotation of several films that I use throughout. So next year will probably be something different. Not What About Bob, not Shutter Island. So, it's good. Most of the time when I show this film, it succeeds or comes right after our discussion of psychopathology. And when I talk about psychopathology, I talk about anxiety broadly, I talk about depressive disorders broadly, and then I talk about psychotic disorders broadly, and then I go into, schizophrenia, for example, and I spend a little bit more time on schizophrenia since it is the most prevalent of any psychotic disorder that might be out there. And when students watch this film, they might latch on to the psychosis of Teddy/Andrew and call that schizophrenia. The interesting thing about the movie is that it is not actually schizophrenia. And a lot of pop commentary get this wrong too. But if we were to go to the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders from the American Psychiatric Association, currently in its 5th edition, his symptoms and presentation of this disorder are either, or maybe a combination of, chronic delusional disorder, which is a psychotic disorder, but not necessarily schizophrenia, because it doesn't have some of the negative symptoms, just positive symptoms. Delusion is a positive symptom, right? It's an added symptom. It's something new, why it's called positive. Or post-traumatic stress disorder, which definitely tracks here with secondary psychotic features. So PTSD with secondary psychotic features, because what we have is trauma turned psychosis, rather than, again, classic schizophrenia with positive and negative symptoms being things like flat affect, where a person does not display any highs or lows in their emotions, whether that is the expression of emotion or facial expressions, that kind of thing. So we've got a heavy trauma associated with the later development of delusions and hallucinations, positive symptoms of schizophrenia, right? So the key features that you want to note about the presentation in this film are things like his fixed and elaborate persecution and grandiose delusions. So what does this system look like? Well, first and foremost, we start the movie with Teddy Daniels believing that he is a U.S. Marshal and has been called to Shutter Island to investigate a missing patient. That patient's name is Rachel Solando. And as I was saying before we transitioned, Rachel Solando is a anagram for Dolores Latis, who is technically Teddy's deceased wife. So he creates this missing patient named Rachel Solando, somebody who does not exist. He has this shared war history with Andrew Latis, which is that Andrew was part of the military who liberated Dachau, but constructed this separate delusional system. And the delusional system is anchored by a past where he claims a fire was started in his old city apartment by a guy named Andrew Latis, who we meet, so to speak, later in the film. Like I said, Elias Codius lights a match, has gnarly scars on his face, lights a match, and it plays into the whole this whole delusional past of Latis being a fire starter, somebody who is an arsonist and a fan of fire. So we have this elaborate delusional system, which of course plays into the chronic delusional disorder diagnosis rather than schizophrenia. Most of these delusions are accompanied by prominent hallucinations. We see these hallucinations throughout the movie. One trigger seems to be intense light. There is a storm on the island over this investigatory period, right? They can't leave the island. The storm is coming, so the boat's not available. Can't leave, but there's lightning. It's a storm. Of course, Teddy/Andrew suffers from migraines. And though I'm not a sufferer of migraines myself, I do understand that, things like intense light and sound are not great during a migraine. And so Scorsese plays with light in this way where he triggers a hallucination by some hefty external stimulus, flashes of light, lightning, loud noises, disorientation, all that kind of stuff, right? Most of those hallucinations tend to be of Dolores. But then he also has a hallucination of his eldest daughter. And the way that they made this daughter look is frightening, just devoid of all color. And that's because we learn later at the end of the episode when the psychopathology is coming to a head, the psychotherapy, the reveal of the truth, the twist ending sends Teddy into this deep flashback. And we learn that Dolores drowned her children, their 3 children, in the lake by their house while Andrew was on a work trip. Striking hallucinations, right? Haunting. That flashback scene is sucky, very, very sucky, especially if you have children and you watch the deep despair in Leo DiCaprio. One of his strongest performances. I'm surprised he was not nominated. Of course, it sort of gets overshadowed by his performance in Inception, which also came out in 2010, which is a bit sad, right? You've got the Scorsese film, which is great with Leo in it. But you've also got this Nolan film, which was a much larger spectacle, right? It's not kind of a psychological thriller in its own way, but plays into that grandness, right? Of course, the Nolan aspect of it all overshadowed it, but like the pain and despair in that flashback scene is wild.
You're a fucking rat in a maze.
George, you're wrong.
Really? Been alone much since you got here?
I've been with my partner.
You never worked with him before, have you?
He's a U.S. Marshal.
You never worked with him before, have you?
George, look, I know people. I trust this man.
Then they've already won.
Fuck. They're gonna take me to the lighthouse. They're gonna cut into my brain. And I'm only here because of you!
George, I'm gonna get you out of here, not going to the lighthouse. You're not.
You can't dig out the truth and kill Ladis at the same time. You gotta make a choice. You understand that, don't you?
I'm not here to kill anyone.
Liar!
I'm not gonna kill him, I swear to you. I swear.
She's dead. Let her go. Let her go.
Tell him, Teddy. Tell him why.
You gotta do it. There's no other way. Let her go.
Tell him about the day you brought me my locket.
You gotta do it.
Oh, I told you my heart was breaking, and you asked me why.
She's fucking with your head.
And I told you it was from happiness.
She's gonna kill you. She's gonna kill you. You wanna uncover the truth? You gotta let her go.
I can't.
You have to let her go! I can't! I can't!
So hallucinations throughout, like I said, Rachel Solano in the cave, the delusions about what happens in the lighthouse, with like lobotomies and other human experimentation by Dr. Niedering, continuing his Nazi ways, as opposed to, what is probably true, which is that he was a full-on defector, right? So we have all of that. And then finally, the aspect of his presentation is strong trauma, the anchor which created this issue. Dolores has what I think we would diagnose today as and this is coming from a non-clinical psychologist, would stem from some form of psychosis born out of severe depression. Don't really know what her circumstances are, except that she is unhappy living with 3 children and her husband is always gone. It's not really known why she is delirious. She could be, it is indicated that Andrew is also an alcoholic as a way to mask his grief from Dachau. So there is that aspect, right? The trauma is not only her killing the children in the lake, drowning the children in the lake, and stumbling upon this accidentally. He asks the question, "Baby, why you all wet?" and realizes that she's wet because she was in the lake drowning the kids. I don't know how you drown 3 kids at once without them knowing, but she was able to do it. And so he shoots her in the stomach. And so he murders her, and he feels an extreme amount of guilt and grief about that, as well as the grief and loss of his 3 children. With all of this together, you get a recognizable pattern. So CPTSD, chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, with hallucinations and delusions, which are fear-based and trauma-related. So we have chronic delusional disorder and PTSD with secondary psychotic features. Boom, that would be my diagnosis, even though I'm not a clinical psychologist. That's my pop psychological diagnosis, okay? From my understanding of the DSM, I do have a copy of the text, and so I went through it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this. So I told my students after we watched it, I was like, okay, so listen, you might be thinking this goes with our discussion of schizophrenia, but it's important that you recognize here that the film is setting up a different psychological story because of the trauma that we learn about at the end of the movie, but also because of the trauma that we learn about in the middle of the movie, a flashback of Andrew arriving at Dachau as part of the liberating force. So we have that pair of traumas. So it's not setting up schizophrenia as the psychotic disorder, but it's setting up something else. So you got to pay attention to that. And actually, quite a few of my students absorbed that difference there and were able to accurately identify PTSD as the source of the psychosis in the film, which was great. I asked them a question about it on their last test. They didn't have to talk about the portrayal of psychosis in the movie. So the ones that did, I would say 75% of them accurately identified PTSD as the main driver here rather than schizophrenia. But of course, some students talked about other aspects of the film because what they were asked to do was identify one inaccurate portrayal and one accurate portrayal. And I think as far as accuracy goes, this is a fairly strong portrayal of how someone might, and then using the trickery of filmmaking, share with others how someone might be experiencing CPTSD with chronic delusions. I think it's pretty good.
If we fail with you, then everything that we've tried to do here will be discredited, everything.
We're on the front lines of a war here, old boy. And right now, it all comes down to you.
Don't move! Don't move!
Andrew, no.
My name is Edward Daniels. This one's loaded. I can tell by the weight.
I see, and that's your firearm, Marshal, you're sure?
My initials are on the side. There's a dent in the barrel from when Philip Stack shot at me. You're not gonna fuck with my mind on this one, Doctor.
Then blast away, because that's the only way you're ever getting off this island. Andrew, please don't.
My God. What did you do to my goddamn gun?
It's a toy, Andrew. We're telling you the truth. Dolores was insane, manic depressive, suicidal. You drank, stayed away, ignored what everyone told you. You moved to that lake house after she purposely set your city apartment on fire. Then you went to Andrew,
All you've done is lie!
Your children, Andrew, your children! Simon, Henry. We never had any children. Your wife drowned them at the cabin by the lake. And here, the little girl, the one you dream of every night.
We never had a little girl.
The one who tells you over and over that you should have saved her. Saved them all. Your daughter. Her name was Rachel. Are you going to deny that she ever lived? Andrew, are you?
Some scenes that I want to characterize here from the movie stem from, and I'm going to go in order here, right? So, well, maybe not order. I'm going to, so opening of the ferry, the first scene that we have with Teddy is that he is seasick, dysregulated, throwing up, discombobulated. She's just all over the place, right? And he's extremely hypervigilant, which represents this state of hyperarousal, which is part of the PTSD symptom cluster, right? Which is the startle response, highly irritable, can't sleep. And over the course of the next few days, we see that again. But he labels this in his role as a U.S. Marshal as just cop stress, right? Going back to the flashback, the reveal flashback of the dead children in the water, right? So there's a slow motion sequence where he is walking in a flooded house where they took the house set and they just filled it with water, right? So this is a manifestation of his grief and his sadness and his despair, right? Flooding the house as opposed to actually what he was doing in the real flashback, which was he was running into the lake because he saw floating bodies. And that represents a core trauma memory. And through his PTSD, he is re-experiencing this. You hear this a lot from heavy trauma survivors, whether that be war, sexual assault, or anything like that. It's vivid. Scorsese makes it vivid, right? It is sensory. We get the sounds. We get the sights. We get the emotion that Teddy is feeling, that Andrew is feeling in that moment, where the hallucination is so perceptually real that people who experience hallucinations are astonished to hear that nobody else heard or saw what they perceived, right? In addition to the emotional intensity of not only the narrative, but that moment of the flashback. And then, of course, we flash back to conversations with Dolores, but we also have hallucinated conversations with Dolores, right? So one of those hallucinations is Dolores telling Teddy to blow up the car. Turns out it was Dr. Cawley's car. And we do hear that Teddy Andrew did actually blow up the car. That whole sequence was not fully a hallucination. He did blow up the car because Dr. Cawley says, "You blew up my car. I love that car." In other sequences, we see Dolores giving Teddy some cryptic clues. So he always knows what the next step is in the investigation with Chuck. as they're investigating the 67th patient who is missing at Ashcliff, because Dolores keeps feeding him these clues, right? Fire, water, guilt, blame, all of this stuff. And then finally, another scene that I want to, well, a set of scenes I want to explore with relationship to the portrayal of Teddy's PTSD is the conspiracy delusions that accompany this shared trauma of Dachau and Dolores murdering the children, and then Andrew murdering Dolores, which is the rabbit hole that Teddy goes down while he's investigating this missing patient. Turns out the missing patient is Andrew Laeddis. That's the whole aspect of this role-playing therapy. Find Andrew Laeddis, Teddy Daniels. Turns out, find your inner person. Find the real person inside you.
Rachel Solando. The real one. And did you kill your children?
I never had children. I was never married. And before I was a patient at Ashcliff, I worked here.
You were a nurse?
I was that Dr. Marshall. You think I'm crazy?
No, I
And
never...
if I say I'm not crazy? Well, that hardly helps, does it? There's the cockiest genius of it. People tell the world you're crazy. And all your protests to the contrary just confirm what they're saying.
I'm not following you, I'm sorry.
Once you're declared insane, then anything you do is called part of that insanity. Reasonable protests or denial. Valid fears. Paranoia.
Survival instincts are defense mechanisms.
You're smarter than you look, Marshall. That's probably not a good thing.
Tell me something.
Yeah.
What happened to you?
I started asking about these large shipments of sodium amytal and opium-based hallucinogens.
Psychotropic drugs.
I asked about the surgeries, too. You ever heard of a transorbital lobotomy? They zap the patient with electroshock, then go through the eye with an ice pick. Pull out some nerve fibers. Makes the patients much more obedient, tractable. It's barbaric, unconscionable. Do you know how pain enters the body, Marshall? Do you?
Depends on where you're hurt.
No. It has nothing to do with the flesh. The brain controls pain. The brain controls fear, empathy, sleep, hunger, anger, everything. What if you could control it?
The brain?
Recreate a man so he doesn't feel pain or love or sympathy. A man who can't be interrogated because he has no memories to confess.
You can never take away all a man's memories. Never.
Marshall, the North Koreans used American POWs during their brainwashing experiments. They turned soldiers into traitors. That's what they're doing here. They're creating ghosts to go out in the world and do things sane men never would.
To have that kind of ability, that kind of knowledge, that would take years.
Years of research. Hundreds of patients to experiment on. 50 years from now, people will look back and say, here, this place is where it all began. The Nazis used the Jews, Soviets used prisoners in their own gulags, and we tested patients on Shutter Island.
But the rabbit hole is the link that Teddy makes in his own mind about Dachau and what's happening on Shutter Island, what's happening at Ashcliff, right? So he meets Dr. Neidring, and Neidring says, he turns out Neidring is German, and the interesting thing that Teddy throws out during the film, which I thought was great, was Leo just seamlessly goes into pretty good German, directly talking to Neidring and says, what are you doing to people here at Shutter Island? Well, the interesting thing that was going on at the time, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next segment, The Germans, the Nazis, did pretty terrible things to humans during World War II, and that was part of the Nuremberg trials, right? And that the reason why the Nuremberg Code exists and was codified in 1947 was because of these Nazi experiments on humans. And so Teddy thinks that because there's a German here at Ashcliff, that they are doing non-sanctioned experiments on people, the patients and the inmates of Ashcliff, right? So mind control experiments, the things that the fake Rachel Solando tells him, the hallucinated Rachel Solando tells him in the cave near the lighthouse, right? MK Ultra kind of stuff, right? Mind control experiments using drugs. There are several scenes where Teddy just casually takes drugs that are handed to him. And you got to wonder, what are they? Now, if we believe Dr. Cawley as the most reliable narrator in this film, played by Ben Kingsley, then you have to wonder, where did he come up with all of this stuff? Well, it's this persecution that is incorporated into the delusion, right? Is incorporated into delusion. Real historical horrors, Nazi camps, as well as, at the time, if you were in the know, unethical U.S. experiments. Well, you blend them together and you get, in somebody who is experiencing real psychosis, then you get just a massive conspiracy theories. So what this appears to be is a complex persecutory delusional system full of coherent speech and planning. In the middle of the film, you're invested in Teddy figuring it out. You're invested. You're like, something's weird here. Maybe we'll figure it out. The belief system is organized, though it's false, right? We're talking about delusions. It's organized, though. We go from real horrors to current players, add in some mystery, and you get a conspiracy theory, right? And then, of course, strong emotional investment because of Teddy/Andrew's experience liberating Dachau and his quest to continue justice, right? Justice must be served for that. So my analysis here of accuracy, I want to go through what I think the portrayal gets right, what is exaggerated / misconstrued, misrepresented, etc. So what I think the movie gets right is using Teddy/Andrew's trauma as the organizer for his psychosis. His entire delusional world is structured to avoid the truth of murdering his wife because she murdered their children. And the portrayal of this trauma as the organizer of psychosis is supported by recent research. 2018, Compean and Hamner explore the PTSD SP, secondary psychotic features, diagnostic and treatment challenges. I also want to highlight the fact that Teddy's delusions offer him protection. The role play, psychotherapy, functions as a dissociative defense. If he's Teddy, then he's a U.S. Marshal. He has power. He has competency. He has respect. He doesn't have to be Andrew, the guy who murdered his wife. It fits with how psychosis, for some, represent a situation for making meaning around a reality that is intolerable. And the end of the film really highlights how Teddy/Andrew thinks about the whole situation. Those two aspects that I think the film gets right. Trauma as the organizer for the psychosis, and then the way that the delusions protect the fragile psychology of the real person, Andrew, who did some terrible things, has experienced terrible things. He says to Dr. Shaheen, who is trying to gauge whether or not Teddy has returned after the ordeal of Andrew accepting his reality as Andrew Latis, which happens in the scene prior. He shows and tells Shaheen and Cawley that he is aware of who he is as a human being, that he is aware of his past, that he can state that unequivocally, all of that stuff. But in this final scene, he says, as Teddy, thinking that Shaheen is his partner Chuck, he says, something's going on here, and we got to get to the bottom of it. And Shaheen looks over at Cawley and Nyring. Nyring's ready to do a lobotomy to end Andrew's suffering. That's essentially what is being indicated here, that he is too far gone. He can't continue anymore. He can't keep harming other inmates like George Noyce. Is it better to die a hero or live as a monster? And I think he understands that once he gets this lobotomy, because he is lucid now, he is lucid as Andrew. He's just playing the role of Teddy. I firmly believe that he does not slip back at the end here into his Teddy. Because when he says, is it better to die a hero or to live as a monster? He fully knows. He is saying that to Dr. Shaheen because he no longer wants to live as a monster. He no longer wants to live as the person who has 3 dead children and killed the love of his life because she's the one who did that. I think he fully understands that. He's lucidly playing into the role so he can get this lobotomy and become the compliant person who rakes fake leaves at Ashcliff for the rest of his life, not knowing who he really is at all, just sort of living day to day, moment to moment as living zombie, we'll say, as many reports of frontal lobotomies left patients and is shown in the movie. Where I think this film drifts into a little bit of exaggeration and melodrama is that they play up this role-playing aspect. So Dr. Cawley is, of course, a psychodynamic therapist who wants to work with incredibly intractable patients, not responsive to any kind of treatment, wants to, as I'll discuss in the next segment, wants to change the nature of psychiatric treatment in the United States, right? Bring more psychotherapy into it, discussion, talking, exploration of the trauma, the horror, etc., which is against like the current early 1950s, late 1940s aspects of treatment. Again, sort of pitting against Niring's lobotomies, against Cawley's psychotherapy. However, the live action role play is a bit much. And you see that some of the patients are not fans of it. They don't want to do it. They don't like Andrew. Andrew is mean. Andrew is violent. Andrew is terrible. And when they have to talk to him as Teddy, they're like, why do we have to do this? This is ridiculous. The first fake Rachel Solando is actually played by a nurse. Emily Mortimer plays this woman who says, I buried you, Teddy Daniels. You're not my Teddy Daniels. And plays this whole role. Turns out she's just a nurse. Like, this whole thing would not have happened. There's no way the entire institution would work in this way. Okay, it's great for the twist. It's great to see that, at the beginning of the movie, they take their guns away because they're not even real guns. And Deputy Warden McPherson is just like, yeah, I'll play along, but oh my gosh. Or the conversation that Teddy has in the little Humvee or Jeep or whatever it is on the island with the actual warden doesn't actually go into, you're Teddy, right? Or you're Andrew, right? Blah, blah, blah. Doesn't go into any of those details. One of the patients asking Chuck for a cup of water and then just writes down in Teddy's notebook, run. So many of the aspects of the live action role play would have disintegrated, despite Cawley's best efforts, would have disintegrated. It's a miracle of filmmaking that Teddy makes to the lighthouse relatively unscathed. Turns out it's Dr. Cawley's office anyways, or some sort of office that Dr. Cawley uses. And it's a miracle of filmmaking that when Chuck falls from the cliffs, that he's not down at the bottom and he's disappeared and he was able to escape immediately, and it's all relatively convenient, and he shows up at the lighthouse to help with the final truth reveal. The other thing, it's just a minor quibble, which is the speed with which Andrew grapples with his changing lucidity. Okay, so that is to say, during the truth reveal where he goes back and forth between being confused but also adamant. I mean, he picks up the gun and he says, "My name is Teddy Daniels." And he tries to shoot Dr. Cawley, and we think he has, but it turns out that was just a figment, just a hallucination of Teddy, and the gun isn't actually real. That speed is far greater than what would actually happen in real life. This kind of work takes years, and insight is fragile and heavily treatment dependent, and would require probably the use of antipsychotic medication, which of course is the fake Rachel Solando, the whole aspect of how they're doing mind control experiments with drugs. No, I think the antipsychotics like Thorazine at the time were revolutionary in treating psychosis. Yeah, it did have its pretty gnarly side effects, right? Because one of the ideas surrounding psychosis is hyperactive dopamine. Then when you reduce the dopamine, which is useful for fluid movement, a degrading dopamine system is what is the hallmark of like Parkinson's disease, for example. So when you reduce the dopamine in someone's brain through these antipsychotics, well, then they're going to get things like tardive dyskinesia, right? A movement disorder where movements aren't as fluid as they could be, and you get shakes and tremors and things like that. So, I mean, that's true. That's real. And that will happen for things like antipsychotic use. But to think that the speed with which the LARP was successful, and it seemingly was successful in my opinion, like I said, the ending, I think Andrew is fully lucid in that he doesn't want to live anymore. He doesn't want to live as Andrew anymore. And so he wants to show them that, he regressed into Teddy, and that's it, right? That's all I'll say about the portrayal on this. I think it's pretty good. But of course, has some filmmaking license taken by the screenwriters and by Scorsese himself as he put this together.
You have outstanding defense mechanisms. You must be quite adept at interrogations. Men like you are my specialty, Men of violence.
Now, that's a hell of an assumption to make.
No assumption, no, not at all. You misunderstand me. I said you are men of violence. I'm not accusing you of being violent. Men. That's quite different.
Now, please, edify us, Doctor.
You both served overseas, huh?
It's not much of a stretch, Doc. For all you know, we're both paper pushers over there.
No, you are not. Since the schoolyard, neither of you has ever walked away from a physical conflict. No, not because you enjoy it, but because retreat isn't something you consider an option.
We weren't raised to run, Doc.
Ah, yes. Raised. And who raced you, Marshal?
Me? Wolves.
Ah. Very impressive defense mechanisms. Do you believe in God, Marshal? No, I'm quite serious.
Das glaube ich. You ever seen a death camp, Doctor? Ein Konzentrationslager. Huh? Ich war dabei bei der Befreiung von Dachau. Ihr Englisch ist sehr gut, fast perfekt. His English really is very good. You hit the consonants a tad hard, though.
Yeah, German?
Is legal immigration a crime, Marshal?
Oh, I don't know, Doctor. You tell us. Now listen, we're gonna need those files on Sheehan and the rest of the staff as well.
No personnel files will be released to you, period.
We're gonna need those files.
Out of the question.
Bullshit out of the question! Bullshit! Who the hell is in charge here anyway, huh? Huh?
Dr. Nyring acts as liaison to our board of overseers. He relayed your request and it's been refused.
Refused? They don't have the authority to refuse, and neither do you, sir.
Marshal, continue your investigation and we'll do all we can to help.
This investigation is over. We're gonna file our reports and we're gonna hand it over to
Hoover's boys.
Hoover's boys, that's right. We're taking the ferry back in the morning. Come on, Chuck.
Okay, in this next segment, what I want to talk about is psychiatric treatment at this point in time, as described by the characters in this movie in the mid-20th century, right? So the film, like I said, takes place in 1954, which is a inflection point in psychiatry. It represented, in that decade, and sort of the decades to follow, represented the pivot of psychiatry from physical treatments to psychotherapy. It represented the end of what is considered heroic treatments, right? These medical treatments that were meant to cure. So like I said, Dr. Nyring is heavily suggested to be a orbital frontal lobotomist, that he takes the most hard-nosed patients at Ashcliff and renders them inert by doing this frontal lobotomy. Other treatments that led up to this were electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, still used today, but in really heavily controlled settings, of course, with the full voluntary consent of the patient, and really not used for things like psychosis, but rather depression. And insulin shock therapy, putting someone into a coma, right? Shocking their system, attempting to rid the brain of the issues that might be contributing to the psychosis. All of these heroic therapies were physical, were invasive at a place like Ashcliff, which was not only a psychiatric hospital, but also a prison, were involuntary, right? So is the treatment intractable? Are the common treatments not working? Well, then we're going to go with the heroic therapy and we're going to end your suffering. But antipsychotics emerged on the scene in the early 1950s. That's what I mean by this inflection point, right? Really well-timed drama. They set this in the 1950s on purpose, I think. So chlorpromazine launched in 1952, Thorazine, another drug that hit the scene in the 1950s, quickly started replacing these more invasive therapies with metered and measurable dosing to try to curb the positive and or negative symptoms of, but mostly positive, symptoms of psychosis, right? So dropping those delusions, dropping those hallucinations. And we get a great scene that sort of characterizes how the two, in addition to the rise of antipsychotics, there was a push in the medical field as well as the growth of just clinical psychology in general. The 1950s was an inflection point for the American Psychological Association in developing the role of the clinical psychologist in practice. So the treatment of patients using psychotherapy, which had been around for decades, don't get me wrong, Freud and Jung and psychoanalysis and psychodynamic therapy, even the switch those dominant forces in psychotherapy to human-centered therapy from Carl Rogers, his, I think, most famous book, I think came out in 1950. I'm somewhere around there. So the humanistic approach to therapy, this was all at the same time, right? So this, again, the inflection point of this kind of treatment at these places, right? These psychiatric hospitals or institutions for the criminally insane, et cetera, right? So we've got those two versus the old school way of thinking, which is, okay, well, if therapy's not working, we're not making any progress, then let's change the nature of the brain, okay? Let's lobotomize this person. There's a great conversation between Teddy and Kali and Nightring. I would say Chuck sort of in the background here. Conversations about lobotomies. Of course, this is deep within Teddy's delusion about what Nightring is saying, right? So this scene where he's talking about how lobotomies work using an ice pick. It's not in this scene, but he discusses later. Also, they show in the end scene when Andrew accepts his fate, they show the ice pick itself in a towelette. I'm like, you would not have that outside. Get out of here. So the idea of this ice pick, this sharp instrument that goes through the eye, the orbital bone, as a way to placate, to calm patients, and the board of Ashcliff, who are giving Kali one final opportunity to break Andrew out of his delusion, because again, he is violent. He hurt George Noyce just the week before, or a few days before this whole LARP goes into action. And the board, which includes Dr. Nightring, are saying, you've got one more chance, Kali, to do your new school stuff, your radical psychotherapy, or Nightring here is going to do a lobotomy. And that's it. We can't have him harming other patients anymore when he's stuck in his delusion. So you do one more thing, and if it doesn't work, then he's done. Now, historically speaking, there is an aspect of this discussion that it rings true, right? So the transorbital lobotomy, the ice pick variety, if you will, was popularized as a treatment for the intractable patient in the 1940s and 1950s. And it was popularized by Walter Freeman in the US. It actually started in Europe. It was quite popular in Europe at the time as well. And it was used as a treatment in this sort of decade, I would say, right? So tens of thousands of patients were lobotomized, often for psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, severe mood disorders, and behavioral control. Another film that's been on this that I've done a solo essay on was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is the result for McMurphy in that behavioral control. So essentially, this last resort that the board is giving for Andrew, if this thing doesn't work, then he's getting it, because he's got psychosis and he's got behavioral issues. He cannot control himself. He cannot control his violent tendencies. And that's what the warden says, right? If you can't control, do you think yours is better than mine? If you can't control your violence, well, then we are going to use our violence to stop your violence, which is a lobotomy. But these lobotomies were conducted without consent. And that's because these patients were either wards of the state, and so the state had final say on their outcomes. And that is true even though the Nuremberg Code existed. It doesn't matter. The Nuremberg Code had very little teeth behind it. So a place like Ashcliffe would ignore it outright, right? We're still almost 3 decades away from the Belmont Report and the laws that came out of the Belmont Commission. And so you've got that ethical violation, right? And it was also devastatingly permanent. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, the person is placated, but they lose pretty much all aspects of their personality, their emotional control. They have blunted emotions. They become adult children, but more or less living zombie-like, which is what you see in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as well. You don't see that in this film because the movie ends with the orderlies taking Andrew to the operating room, right? We don't see what happens afterward, but we do see a couple of other patients seemingly were lobotomized. There's one patient at the very beginning of the movie who is raking leaves, but there are of course no leaves there, and he blankly stares at Teddy as they walk by. So you have that aspect associated with it. And so not only was it invasive, permanent, and involuntary, it had these deleterious effects, because what happens is that little ice pick, if you will, goes up through the eye bone, the orbital bone, because that is a way to get by, having to go through the skull. So you go up in through the eye, you go past the orbital bone, you pierce the meninges, and you kind of just swishel around that ice pick in there, separating the frontal lobe from the rest of the brain. And for all intents and purposes, the person is still alive because you're not messing with critical functions like breathing and heart rate. Those are all in the hindbrain, in the neck. You could damage those if you wanted to, but then you would be murdering that person, right? So this frontal lobotomy sort of changes the person without killing them. And the film is actually quite accurate in showing the effects of lobotomies, but also that not only they were common, but contested by this 1954 time period. And clinicians like Cawley are trying these radical treatments, this live action role play where everyone in Ashcliffe is involved, because they are horrified by the way that patients act and appear as zombies when there are other ways of treating these people. When antipsychotics came on the market, when treatment strategies got better, when there were a lot of other ways to humanely treat individuals. Other clinicians were like, yeah, we got to use it because our facilities are so overcrowded. They eventually did fall out of favor, lobotomies did, as well as a lot of this other heroic treatment ideas. They did fall out of favor actually essentially by the end of this decade, the 1950s. They fell out of favor. The idea that the treatments happened in the lighthouse is a fiction created by Andrew. I don't think they were done in the lighthouse, but the way that Teddy likens them to the gothic horror of it all, right? The crudeness of it, the uncleanliness of it is all dramatic, right? That's all in service of the story. Not far off though. But most medical procedures aren't as clean as they are today. The whole idea of germs and sterilization and making sure that not only the patient is sterile, but so are the instruments and everything like that. Not far off from what happening there, but I don't think it happened in the lighthouse. That the lighthouse was Dr. Cawley's office, because lighthouses really have a bottom room and a top room. From what my understanding, I've never been in a lighthouse, but my understanding is that lighthouses are a staircase up to the light at the top. So I don't think there is any surgery room that's happening in there, right?
Marshal Daniels.
Doctor.
Marshal Hall. Thank you, Deputy Warden. That'll be all.
Yes, sir. Pleasure, gentlemen.
He had a lot to say about you.
McPherson's a good man. He believes in the work we do here.
And what would that be exactly?
A moral fusion between law and order and clinical care.
Pardon me, Doc, a what between what and what?
Those paintings are quite accurate. Used to be the kind of patients we deal with here were shackled and left in their own filth. They were beaten. As if whipping them bloody would drive the psychosis out, we drove screws into their brains. We submerged them in icy water until they lost consciousness or even drowned.
And now?
We treat them, try to heal, try to cure. And if that fails, at least we provide them with a measure of comfort in their lives, calm.
These are all violent offenders, right? I mean, they've hurt people, murdered them in some cases.
In almost all cases, yes.
And personally, Doctor, I'd have to say screw their sense of calm.
It's my job to treat my patients, not their victims. I'm not here to judge.
So this female prisoner,
Patient.
patient, one Rachel Solando, escaped sometime in the last 24 hours.
Last night, between 10 and midnight.
She considered dangerous?
You could say that. She killed all 3 of her children. She drowned them in the lake behind her house. She took them out one by one, held their heads under till they died. Then she brought them back inside and arranged them round the kitchen table. She ate a meal there before a neighbor dropped by.
And what about the husband?
He died on the beaches at Normandy. She's a war widow. She starved herself when she first came here. She insisted the children weren't dead.
Sorry, Doctor, you don't happen to have an aspirin, do you?
Prone to headaches, Marshal?
Sometimes, but today I'm a little more prone to seasickness.
Ah, dehydration.
You all right, boss? Yeah.
In that case, you're quite right. The simpler, the better.
Oh, thanks so much.
Rachel still believes the children are alive. She also believes this place is her home in the Berkshires.
Hey, you're kidding me.
She's never once in 2 years acknowledged that she's in an institution she believes we're all deliverymen, milkmen, postal workers. To sustain the delusion that her children never died, she's created an elaborate fictional structure, and she gives us all parts to play in that fiction.
So have you searched the grounds yet?
The warden and his men scoured the island. Not a trace. And what's more disturbing is we don't know how she got out of her room. It was locked from the outside, and the only window's barred. It's as if she evaporated straight through the walls.
I want to focus really quickly on what Cully calls the new psychiatry, right? So he is a fan of talk therapy. He's a fan of role play. He's a fan of using medication to not only enhance those previous 2, but to also use as a sedative in case, things get a little too hefty. We see that happen at the end of the film where Andrew finally accepts his truth. As I said, Collie is under the gun here. He has one final attempt to break Andrew from his delusions, which is contributing to the violence at Ashcliff, because the board has had it up to here, right? Let's say the warden, this is just me making another speculation here, but let's just say the warden is fed up with having this one patient who is like the warden in that he's a violent person. He was in the military. He still thinks of himself as law enforcement, and so righteous violence. But the warden is using his violence in what he would consider a productive way, being a warden of a prison and psychiatric facility combo. Whereas Andrew is, as Teddy, is using his violence in an unproductive way, beating up George Noyce and other patients, right? So Dr. Cawley is under the gun here at the board, probably at the urging of Nyring, probably at the urging of the warden, probably at the urging of orderlies, nurses, you name it, to end this. And so Cawley has got one last attempt to use this new approach. At the end of the movie, when, again, we hear Andrew say, is it better to die as a hero than live as a monster? You see the despondency on Cawley's face when Shaheen looks over to the group and shakes his head, suggesting that live action role play did not stick. You see the despondency. You see him feel as though the old school in which he considers has won. It's heartbreaking, to be honest with you. I the first time I saw it, where I knew the ending already, where I already knew the twist, and I could just look at how people experience the information on their face, because they know. The actors know. They know the plot. They know how they're supposed to act in a certain way. They know what facial expressions to give. That you look at those facial expressions and you can just feel his heartbreak. As a psychologist in the modern world, again, not a clinical psychologist, but one who sees the value in talk therapy and psychotherapy and medication and non-invasive treatment, you really feel for Cawley, because he seems to be the one who has Andrew's best interests at heart. Of course, I would say Mark Ruffalo's character does as well, but like, you see Cawley, who's just like, he's trying to break Andrew out of this, and he wants Andrew to break out of this, but he's at the end of his rope. Nyring says, we fix the person by altering their brain. We know what the brain does now. Spoiler alert, they really didn't, because we still don't really know. Yeah, we have localization of function theories and evidence from the last 30 years, I would say, of neuroimaging. But in the 1950s, they barely knew anything. People were still heavily into phrenology in that time, even though it was already widely discredited as pseudoscience. There were still people who were fanatics for it and wouldn't let it go, even in the 1950s. So Nyring being the one who's like, we fix you by changing the brain, where Cawley's like, no, you got to fix the mind, because it's not the brain, by therapy and medication. We alter the brain chemistry, which then alters the mind, and we get to that altered mind by therapy. And I think that's a great eclectic approach by the psychiatrist in the film, right? The only one who is willing to take these new ideas from psychodynamic and rehabilitative approaches that weren't necessarily new at the time, but were just making their way into the medical world. Even though Freud, for example, was a physician, he spent most of his time talking to other psychologists, not psychiatrists. So there was a disconnect there. That's I think, a really interesting way to present the dichotomy that we have here, right? The other thing that I want to say about the portrayal of psychiatry in this movie is the setting, right? So we have the physical environment of Ashcliff. So Ashcliff is a hospital. Like I said, it's a psychiatric facility, but it is also a prison. And unfortunately, it is Gothic architecture. So it's very terrifying when you see it like looming. And of course, the music is so good in this movie. The music is just heart pumping. You look at the architecture, and then you're faced with the music, and you're like, holy crap, some bad stuff happens at this place. Right? So it's a composite of all of these things, and that all plays a role in how the viewer, the audience, accepts information. Because it is not only a prison, but a psychiatric facility, you have locked wards. Ward C is a prominent ward where people are in cages. So they are in cells that have metal framing. You have cells that are secluded in this ward where you can only hear people, but sometimes some of these secluded cells, like the one George Noyce is in, is secluded from everyone else, sort of like a solitary confinement idea. People are held in shackles. Okay, so we see as Teddy and Chuck are arriving on the island, some patients are in leg shackles so they can't run away. And this is consistent with mid-century practice at these facilities. There were quite a few of these facilities throughout the country. Most of them were on the East Coast and the Midwest, I will say. And that's why this setting is New England. So people have Boston, New England accents, okay, Massachusetts, I guess, because these facilities had been around for a while. And of course, it being the only thing on an island makes it that much more horrific. Orderlies and guards all have like a shared responsibility of maintaining peace on the island, maintaining peace among patients and inmates. And so they use physical intimidation to get their respect across. Nurses are peripheral. They sort of follow the direction of the doctors. But of course, the warden is the head honcho on the island. It's not Dr. Cawley. He is the head psychiatrist, so he is probably the chief medical officer of this facility, but he is not in charge, right? So from a state perspective, the prison is hierarchically above the medical professionals on the thing, right? And so these physicians, especially Cawley, do have discretionary power over diagnosis and fate, but they are held within the bounds of what we, of course, hear throughout the movie of the board. And I believe the warden would be on that board. So Ashcliffe itself is a character in this movie because of how it is portrayed, and I think it's phenomenal. And as I said, the tug and pull of the two therapies in this 1954, again, specifically chosen because of its closeness to World War II and how the horrors of that were fresh in the minds of everyone, but also this inflection point in old psychiatry versus modern psychiatry, or a movement toward modern psychiatry. But Ashcliffe being there is also historically accurate. What's missing or distorted, though? Medication, however discussed in the movie, both in a true sense, that is to say, coming from the mouth of Cawley, or in a conspiratorial sense, coming from the fictional Rachel Solando in the cave, not really all that used in the movie, right? So 1954, like chlorpromazine or thorazine were already shown to be successful in published research in clinical trials, but not really used in this. Of course, the reason why is probably because it keeps the narrative centered on the delusions and the trauma. It keeps the film centered on Ashcliffe as a character because, some patients were being treated with antipsychotics in an outpatient sense by this time. They weren't necessarily institutionalized or hospitalized. They could be taking these drugs under the supervision of a medical professional while living in a home or at home with parents, siblings, or extended family, etc. Ignoring medication, I think, was a narrative choice, so Ashcliffe could remain a character here, and you wouldn't reach the twist, so to speak, as dramatically as you might if somebody was like, oh, I'm taking medication and we're going through the psychotherapy, just you and me. Like, you could tell this story as a conversation between Cawley and Andrew Laeddis, where you kind of just throw in the fantastical elements, but it's really just a conversation between the two of them. You could do that, but that would get rid of some of the fun associated with the setting, so to speak. Furthermore, as I said at the start of this segment, ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, and insulin shock therapy are not shown as potential aspects, potential treatment options. It's straight to lobotomy. Interestingly, a film set in and around this time, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, does explore those treatment options before McMurphy is finally done. I will say, however, though, that even though they're not shown in the movie, it's entirely possible that Andrew Laeddis experiences those two therapies, maybe ECT, maybe insulin shock, but probably ECT within that time period of 2 years, right? We learned that he's been at Ashcliffe for 2 years. So maybe I'll give the film a pass, and perhaps they used those. They didn't work. He's still stuck in his delusion. So we got to move on to the next thing. He's super violent. We need to move on, that kind of thing. Of course, the narrative focus on lobotomy does allow for what I said earlier, which was the wholly constructed delusional conspiracy of Nyring being an unrepentant Nazi, even though that is not the case in real life, or in the real life of the narrative of the movie, right? The fictional real life. So, there is that aspect of distortions there. They're not bad, though. Like, I will say that what's missing or distorted here, it does not represent a huge strike for me on this film. Like, what is discussed via dialogue and what is shown in this movie is incredibly accurate for 1954. Sure, they didn't use medication and they sort of ignored that aspect. But for all intents and purposes, it was there. It was just in the background. We wanted to maintain, the filmmakers wanted to maintain the whole mystery of it all, we'll say.
How are we doing this morning?
Good. Neil?
Can't complain.
So what's our next move?
You tell me.
Gotta get off this rock, Chuck. Get back to the mainland, whatever the hell's going on here, it's bad. Don't worry about it, they're not gonna catch us.
That's right, we're too smart for him.
Yeah, we are, aren't we? You know, this place makes me wonder.
Yeah, what's that, boss?
Which would be worse? To live as a monster? Or to die as a good man?
Teddy?
The last thing I wanted to talk about in this film were a couple of concepts that I found to be intriguing, stuff that you may not really pay attention to, especially if you're not in the psychopathology world. Of course, I did the looking around the internet, the research, so to speak, of aspects of this, and like I said, I've watched it several times and have grappled with the DSM and all of that stuff. So these are things that may not be readily apparent, but I've noticed over the years. So the first one that I wanted to mention is something that is not generally discussed with relation to psychotic disorders because it is sort of its own umbrella type of categorization in the DSM. I don't know if that's true for the ICD, the International Classification of Disorders, which is the other kind of diagnostic mental disorders manual. I don't know if this is the case here, but I do know that the DSM does separate psychotic disorders and dissociative disorders. And while I spent most of this episode talking about Teddy and Andrew's psychosis, I do want to point out that there is some dissociation involved in this as well, right? His dissociation of his entire Andrew Laeddis persona turns into Teddy. I do not think in the slightest that this movie represents a dissociative identity disorder film like Identity in 2003 or Split in 2016. Like, I don't think that this is a DID movie at all, but I do think that dissociation does play a role, even though Teddy's diagnosis or Andrew's diagnosis would not be dissociative identity disorder. What he does do is the symptom of dissociation. He goes into this persona, and this represents a dissociative defense structure. He created this narrative. It is a shared history with Andrew Laeddis. So yes, Andrew was part of the liberating force at Dachau. So was Teddy, et cetera, et cetera. But the trauma of that shared history is overwhelming. And so Teddy experiences problems associated with that shared trauma as well. So even though he develops this dissociative persona, it's not fully protective as one might observe in a DID patient. So that's one aspect that I thought was interesting. There's some confirmation bias in the movie as well. Teddy buys into all the conspiracy theories that are presented to him by anyone he talks to. He buys into this idea that Nyring is an unrepentant Nazi who's experimenting on humans. He buys into the conspiracy that Andrew Laeddis is a fire starter and burned down his apartment and killed his wife, which is untrue. He buys into the conspiracy that Rachel Solando is a real person, that she's missing, that she runs away from or that she somehow escapes from Ashcliff. All of that stuff. Lots of confirmation bias. Every single ambiguous cue that he sees, experiences on this island. So bars on windows, locked wards, a staff that does not want to role play with him, all gets assimilated into this. Everyone's hiding something. Classic confirmation bias. I love it. It's so good. It does play into the stereotype of the dangerous lunatic trope from this era of cinema. And I don't mean that 2010. I mean back in the mid 20th century, that if you were at a psychiatric facility that you were criminally insane, and then like the whole thing with Batman's rogues gallery or Superman's rogues gallery or any other superhero's rogues gallery, right? This trope that the only way to treat these people is to remove their agency. And of course, I have to come back. I have to end this episode with the line, which would be worse, to live as a monster or to die as a good man, which I've been saying incorrectly, but that's the quote. I've been saying it incorrectly all episode, but that's okay. It's a great topic for discussion. It's a philosophical discussion. What would you want to do? Would you want to live as a monster or to die as a good man? Perspective take. Put yourself in Andrew's shoes. If he is aware of what he did to his wife because what she did, does he fully accept that Andrew dies with lobotomy? Does he recognize this as a lucid insight to his fate at Ashcliff? Is he surrendering himself? It's very good. Like, you can connect this to theories of identity and the self, and how psychopathology changes a person's conception of their identity, of their self. The role of guilt and how powerful it is as an externalizing emotion. We get guilt from others. On the flip side, the internalizing emotion is shame, right? So guilt and shame is Andrew so guilty and so ashamed that he's willing to surrender the rest of his life so he doesn't have to keep playing this game over and over and over again. And finally, like, what is a person's limit to their self-knowledge, what they know about themselves? What is their limit? What would you like to do? Live as a monster or die as a good man? Live as a monster, constantly role-playing over and over and over again, or to just relent? And in my opinion, Andrew relents. He's tired. He's done. He is ready for his ego death, to use the parlance of the time. Thanks for listening to this episode. This, we'll call it audio essay, very similar to what I've done with other recent solo episodes. Thanks for listening to it. Now, if you'd like more of this kind of stuff in potentially a more structured format, well, you can listen to the other episodes that are on this channel that are just me, or you can find my Audible series, A Psychologist Goes to the Movie. 6 audio essays, a course, if you will, of psychology and film. 6 films that have been featured either by myself or with another individual. You can find that on Audible. A Psychologist Goes to the Movies. And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.